Hello and welcome back to Planet Coaster. In today's video, I'm doing a new type of video where I just do a time lapse of me building a coaster. This is going to be a bit of a mini series where I end up building or designing the rest of the area around this ride. Just because I'm actually really happy with how this one turned out. I think it's really good. I'm building a Vekoma Mini-Hyper, which if you don't know what that is, Vekoma is the company and Mini-Hyper is the type of ride. So a hyper coaster is a coaster over 200 feet but below 299 feet. And so a Mini-Hyper is one that isn't quite to the 200-foot barrier but still follows the same design philosophies. So, starting off, the max height is 145 feet, which actually is a pretty decent height for this type of coaster. Um, it does end up being quite a decently long ride, about a minute in ride time, which is really good for a coaster. Um, Overall, I'm very happy with how the ride turned out. I am using segments of 4-meter smoothing, which is the best way to get smooth coasters in Vanilla Planet Coaster. Here you can see I'm working on the twisted drop. This is the only part of the coaster I'm not exactly sold on. It doesn't really feel snappy enough for my liking, but I think for what it is, it works fine. You can see the train coming down right there. This is another element I'm not sold on. I think the transition into it could have been a little bit smoother, but it's this upwards roll. But after this point of the ride, I end up really liking everything I do. The only thing with this I would change is it feels like it starts banking a little early. But other than that, I think the roll is very well done. Very floaty, while also being very whippy. Yeah, the coaster itself, the way I'm doing it is I'm using the free fly coaster, which is because it's the easiest to smooth. Like the track ends up being very, very smooth for what you can do in game. And I just changed the coaster train. Here you can see I'm working on the overbank turnaround sort of thing. I really like this element. It has some good positives going into it, and then it not stalls out, but it slows down enough to give a little bit of a hanging sensation at the top. I think it worked out really, really well, and it also just looks very nice. It's also it looks a bit like an inclined loop, but or was it an inclined dive loop actually? But I'm just gonna call it an overbank turnaround because I'm not gonna get into any wacky new element names. The ride ends up having, I think, four inversions. Which actually is pretty good for this type of ride. Normally, these have 2, 3, so this one has 1 extra. But also has a lot of really good moments of ejector airtime. Here you can see me putting in the second of the 4 inversions. I wanted a very classic Immelman. And I'm very happy with how this one turned out. The transition out of it could have been a little bit more drawn out with the turn, but for the space I had, I think it worked out fine. This airtime hill doesn't getting removed just because the forces were way too intense on it, but it does come back. Here's that turn you can see me doing. You can see it's a bit tight, but here's that other hill. It's a lot more gradual, but it still gives a really good moment of strong airtime, which is perfect for this type of ride. I think this turn ends up having the G-force is still within like safe range, but it's just very abrupt, which I'm not exactly a fan of. But it's too late into the process to go back and change it because I'd have to rework the entire second half of the layout. But for what it is, I think it worked out perfectly fine. Yeah. I just really like the shape of this Immelman. It's very pleasant to watch. I am gonna custom support that the top part, just because the normal supports are very wide, and not exactly my cup of tea. But yeah, there are a couple parts that need a little bit of custom supporting, that being one of them. But other than that, I think most of it's just gonna be like making the area look good. Which for talking about the area and what I have planned, I'm gonna make this a bit like if it was at like a Cedar Fair park, so a little bit of landscaping, but not exactly super heavily themed. More so stylized. I'm not exactly sure what the style is gonna be, but it's gonna be very pleasant. Let's say. Um, and there's just be a couple trees throughout the layout itself. Here is me. Here I am putting in what ends up being a stangle, like a stall-esque stangle dive. And I think this turned out really well. It doesn't fully invert, but it does go upside down enough for it to have some nice hang time. Smoothing out this turn here, the one thing I'll change about this turn is make it not go as close to the lift hill and make the drop out of it a little bit more intense. But other than that, this turn is very, very nice. It's almost a nice breathing point just to get you to the other side of this lift to go into the final kind of out and back section. And I think it just looks nice. It breaks up the not repetitive, but very, I don't know the word I'm looking for, so I'm just gonna drop that sentence. But yeah, that stall leads into this very fast turn, which originally was going to go into a small hill alongside this 0G stall or stangle dive, whatever you want to call it. But it didn't flow right, so I ended up going over the track here. But that happens after I build that other part, which I start work on now. There was gonna be this very fast transition, but I couldn't get it to work. The track wouldn't turn right, and it just wasn't working because there was gonna be this really nice hill, and I did like how the hill worked because it really did have a nice moment of airtime. It was just the transition into it didn't feel right. Like the way it was banking, it wasn't right. I couldn't fix it well enough. So I ended up scrapping it and doing something else. Yeah, here you can see the very weird banking. Because it wouldn't fully bank the other way before it started turning. So it made it very, very uncomfortable looking. And the turn was too short to fix that banking. So I ended up scrapping that. You can see there how awkward it was. But yeah, this is where I just watch it real quick and I decide, you know what? No, this doesn't work. So yeah, I do think the layout is better off without that because I don't really know where I was going to take the layout after that point. But I'm very happy with what came out of doing this instead. This is a little bit of a problem area, but it does end up being fixed. Right now, it looks a little bit too steeply banked, or too shallow banked. But in the end, it ends up getting fixed and worked out in terms of like the kinks and stuff. This turn here is super intense. I think it pulls like a sustained 3 Gs, which when transitioning into the really rapid transition of this turn makes this section a sleeper hit on the ride. Because I don't think you would expect this turn to be this intense. But then it happens and you're like, dang, okay, that's very, very aggressive. Which I like. I like having what should be more dull moments have a lot of kick to them. It's one of my favorite things to add to my coasters. Because it just spices up the layout and makes it not feel like it's just going element to element. Which is one of my biggest pet peeves in roller coasters. So yeah, working here, I'm going into the final inversion and the final like true element on the ride. And originally I was gonna do this going directly into a turn, but it just didn't. Once again, it didn't look right. So I decided to do this kind of thing and have it just gently bend up and do a small double up into the brakes. And this does end up staying, and I really like it, shallowing that out a bit to make it look better. It doesn't kill the ride spacing, but it does give it this little lull before the airtime pops into the brakes. But it is preceded by this very nice and floaty 0G roll, which ends off the ride on a very high note. And yeah, that's coming close to the end of the layout building, which honestly, I'm very happy with this layout. It's not perfect, but it would be a really, really good coaster in most parks. Has good airtime, has some really good inversions throughout. And yeah, it would just be very comfortable as well, because all the forces are within reason. I think the highest positive G is like 4 point something. If that. I think it only reaches like 3.8 or something like that. And outside of there, airtime is all good. Laterals, there's like one moment where it could be lower. But yeah, I think the layout is really, really good and would be a big standout in a real life park. Final brake run going in. Nothing crazy, just a traditional brake run. And then the holding block. And with that final piece and this smoothing, that brings the layout to a end. Yeah, I just think the layout and ride overall is really, really good and ended up far better than what I had ever hoped. I don't know why the footage stutters here, but keeps it more hidden from you until I show you the full POV. Speaking of which, I'm doing the last little bit before the POV, and that is the color scheme. So, I'll be quiet now and let you see the POV. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoy this type of video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.